Welcome back, guys. We are here working on the K-Swap 308 once again, and we are going to pick up where we left off right before the bodywork for the car arrived. Once it showed up, there was no chance I was going to save it for later. Way too exciting, had to get it put on. But now that it's all done, I'm excited to get back to actually working with some sheet metal and getting some fabrication done. If you've seen previous episodes, you know the last project we were working on was sheet metal under the hood of the car at the front end in an effort to make things look a little bit better and to separate outside of the car from inside of the car. So that's what we're going to work on today. We'll do a little bit of a recap / kind of explain what it is that we're doing here, why we're doing it all, and then we're going to make some templates, shape some sheet metal, and hopefully wind up with something that looks pretty good. I'm excited about it. I think I've got a good game plan together. So let's dive into it. As we get started, once again, I'll say if you like my content and you want to support this channel and stay tuned about what's happening with this car, do me the favor of subscribing or leave me some feedback in the comments, because that kind of thing really helps me out and it helps my channel grow. Now what we're looking at here is what's underneath the hood of the Ferrari, and normally all of this stuff is hidden underneath a fiberglass well for the spare tire, but in our case we've pulled all of that out and now everything's visible, and unfortunately the chassis on this thing is quite ugly, so I want to do something about that. On top of that, I also want to seal off what's inside this cooling bay from what's outside. We've got these huge holes leading to each side of the chassis, and that's not going to work in the long run, so we need to close things off. I don't want debris getting to the cooling stack, and I don't want airflow disrupted for aero purposes. Now, a few episodes ago, I made this aluminum panel to cover up part of what's under the hood, and I made a few other pieces to go with it, but they didn't quite work out. I didn't do enough planning ahead to decide what I actually wanted to make. I'm happy with the way this one fits, so we're going to build off of it and use it for the basis of all of our bends. Now, before recording that previous clip, I had to cut out these two pieces of sheet metal which originally housed some tube work for the factory AC system. They're in the way of what I want to build and are what screwed me up last time. Now, as you can see, those panels were in the way of making a template for a side panel, one that extends from the front of this cooling bay to the back. This panel isn't all too complicated to make, but I've spent a lot of time making a well-fitting template, one that accounts for all of the little nooks and crannies, the tidbits, the details. Making a template that fits really well is key to making a part that fits really well. We'll be making this panel out of thin gauge sheet aluminum, so we don't need to worry too much about our material thickness and/or consuming material in the bends. You can see, though, all of my bend lines drawn on the template, and I've gone in and bent the template to make sure everything's going to work the way that I want it to. You can also see how intricate some of the small details are to making this thing fit just right up against the chassis of the Ferrari. Laying the part out on aluminum isn't anything complicated, just making sure that the template is laying perfectly flat on the material so that we get the accurate shape. I then hauled the aluminum over to the shear and jumped on it many times to get a rough outline of our part. From there it was over to the bandsaw to cut out the rest of the outline. With the blade guide set nice and low and with the speed of the saw set just right, it cuts through the aluminum like butter. Next is laying out the bend lines on the part itself, and getting these accurate is probably the most crucial part of the entire layout. Where these bends are will define whether or not the part fits the car at all. So using a fine tip marker and a precision straight edge, I made sure everything was exactly where I wanted it to be. You don't really get a second shot when bending sheet metal panels. Once you've done it, there's really no going back. You can unbend material just a touch, but that's only in certain scenarios. From there, I took the part over to the big brake and got to bending it up. The second bend on this panel wasn't really able to fit in the bender, but luckily the material was resilient enough not to crush the first bend when I did the second one. Then came the third and final bend for the panel. The bandsaw tends to leave rough edges behind anywhere you use it to cut, so I took a small deburring tool and used it to clean those edges up. This thing works really simply by just drawing it along the edge of your material, and it'll clean up any sharp or rough edges, reducing the risk of cutting yourself on a panel like this. Now, no one would really expect this panel to fit perfectly on the first try, and of course it doesn't. It does need a lot of massaging and trimming on those edges to get everything fit up just right, because even a perfect paper template isn't going to mimic aluminum perfectly. The hardest part to account for is the fact that paper is pretty flexible and it will wave and warp on you as you use it as a template. And that's something that will often translate to a slightly ill-fitting piece once you have a finished part. Leaving a little bit of room on your edges when you cut out your panel initially can save you in the end. The last step for our install of this panel is using some rubber bulb seal that we will cut lengthwise in order to fit over the edge of our panel to seal it from one to the other. If you do this entire process that we've discussed twice, it'll turn out like this. Now, the bulb seal that I've used isn't a permanent solution, and I want to find something more elegant in the end, but it is a proof of concept and is something that I plan on using to seal the panels together. Even though it might be overkill, it will create a really nice finished look. I think the bends on these panels turned out really nicely, and I'm happy that they all lined up and are kind of level and even with the car. They line up with some of the panels that were already in the car to begin with, and the rear panel that we added in. I gotta say, I'm really happy with how this is turning out. It looks so much better than what was there before, especially considering the chassis that is underneath this is from the 1960s and looks like it's made of scaffolding. Major improvement. Now, I know some of you guys are gonna say, hey, if this is a race car, why add the weight? It's not needed. This is just for looks. You're not necessarily wrong, but I wanna be happy with this car as a whole. And I think that the couple of pounds we have added in sheet aluminum are well worth how much more of a finished, polished product we're gonna have. This, no matter what, when I pop the hood, or whatever we wanna call this, if I pop the trunk, I wanna be happy with it when somebody sees in here, and now I will be. So, let's cut out that spare tire mount that we left in here many episodes ago in case we needed it for something. We know that's not the case anymore. Let's chop it out, build one more template and one more panel, see if we can't finish this project off. I'm not sure how many more of these chassis sawzall moments we're really going to get as the build continues. I presume a few more, but I'm trying to savor them as they happen. With that part cut off, I was able to make the next template, and I'll be honest in saying that this template was a real bear to make. The Ferrari chassis is not identical side to side, presumably just due to being a handmade car, but it does make making a template a lot more difficult. I can't just copy it side to side and make it symmetric. Honestly, I spent more than an hour making this template fit the way that I wanted to, and managed to kill the camera baddie before I even finished it. And I still may even redo this panel yet. Of course, I traced this thing, cut it out, and bent it up, but that all happened off camera, so all that was left was to put more edge trimming on this panel and try fitting it to the car. And honestly, it turned out pretty well for a first piece, and I think I like how all of this is really coming together, although I'm not too sure about the corners that are protruding on each side. I need to figure out what I want to do about those. I also need a better solution for the edge trimming, as this is definitely just temporary and doesn't fit as well as I would like it to. I think this whole setup has a lot of potential, and with a little bit more finish work, it's really going to shine. It does a really good job of sealing off what's under the hood from what's outside of it, and I really like the way that it's looking. So I think there's a bunch of room for improvement on these panels. I want to get the fit up of them just right, and I think that's going to take actually getting them installed into the car. I may even wind up remaking that bottom piece that we just did in order to get it perfect, but I am eager to see how everything fits. Once it's actually mounted up, it is just kind of floating in space at the moment, and I also want to figure out what gasket I'm going to use around the edges of some of these pieces to get them to seal up nicely. Now, if you've made it this far into the episode, we might be done on progress for the Ferrari, but I do have something else that I want to pitch your guys' way. I've owned my E36 for about 15 years now, but it's been off the road for a considerable chunk of that for one reason or another. But My friends and my girlfriend have all been saying, hey, I really think it's time. Let's bring that car back to life. And I'm thinking maybe they're right. It could be a really fun series because it needs a lot of work, but I've been stockpiling parts for this thing for the better part of 5 years now. And I've got a lot of stuff to throw at it, and I'd be excited to show you guys and take you along for the build process because this car means a lot to me. And the last time I did anything with it, I had it completely repainted, so it's more or less ready for reassembly, but it's gonna take a lot of work. It's a huge amount of parts, all new running gear, all new underpinnings, all new suspension. I mean, you name it, it's a build by most respects, and we've got to get started at some point. The cool thing about this car though is that it's one of the very first S54 swapped E36s that was ever done, and it's mean. It makes 327 wheel horsepower, it's got the 6-speed trans in it, and as one of the many parts that I've got to put in, it's a 391 triple clutch limited slip. So this thing's gonna be a rocket ship when we're done by, you know, normal E36 standards. It's a really fun car. I love this thing. I've got new wheels for it, we've got interior pieces, I mean, the whole nine. So leave me a comment and let me know if that's stuff that you wanna see. I'm thinking Ferrari episodes on Tuesdays where we have a full week of progress in each episode. And then on Thursdays, you get E36 content where we step-by-step dive into rebuilding this car and getting it back on the street. So leave me a comment, let me know what you think. I'm hopeful that you guys are into this because I'm kind of excited about it and I think it will yield better content for 2 builds at once. Anyways, I will catch you guys on Thursday in the next episode. Thank you as always for the support.